All right, so imagine this. You're in a lab, maybe wearing one of those cool lab coats.
It's goggles.
Oh, yeah, definitely goggles. And you've got this Petri dish, right?
Yeah.
And it's just crawling with bacteria. Your job, you got to figure out exactly what kind of bacteria are throwing a party in there. It's like a microscopic game of Clue, and this is where the Simmons citrate test comes in.
Ah, the Simmon citrate test. Such a simple setup, but man, it can tell you a lot about what these little guys are all about. You're basically putting them on a dare, a dietary dare. Can they hack it? Can they survive on nothing but citrate?
Hold up, citrate. We're talking about the stuff you find in oranges and grapefruits, right? Like what I put in my OJ in the morning.
Exactly. It's a natural compound. You find it in citrus fruits, sure, but also some sodas have it, believe it or not. And get this, some bacteria. That's their feast, their all-you-can-eat buffet.
So how does this test actually work? Do we, like, attach tiny little forks and knives to the bacteria and watch them go to town on a pile of citrate?
If only it were that exciting. No, instead of tiny cutlery, we use a special kind of, how do I put this? A special kind of bacterial jello. We call it agar. It's like a petri dish, but this jello, it's got only citrate for them to munch on. And here's the cool part. The agar also has this pH indicator. Think of it like a mood ring, but for bacteria.
Color-changing bacteria. Okay, now you got my attention. Tell me more.
So picture this. Our tiny friends, if they're able to actually eat this citrate, to break it down and use it, they produce ammonia, like a byproduct.
Okay.
And ammonia, that's basic. So what it does is it raises the pH of the agar, and that's where our mood ring, our pH indicator, does its thing. As the pH changes, the agar changes color too. And we're not just talking any shade. It often turns a very distinct blue.
Actually, our source, it calls it royal blue.
Royal blue.
Yeah, royal blue, which, I don't know about you, but that paints a much more vivid picture in my mind than just, plain old blue.
Oh, absolutely. And, it's a small detail, but it speaks volumes about what's happening at a chemical level. That vibrant blue, that's a sign, a big one, that there's been a major pH shift. Our bacteria aren't just surviving on this citrate diet, they're absolutely loving it. But here's the thing, if the agar, it stays the same color, well, that's our clue. That's how we know these bacteria, they are not fans of the citrate buffet. Picky eaters, those ones.
So it's like we're looking for that bacterial blue plate special, and if they dig it, we know they can survive on this unique diet. But here's the real question. Why does this even matter? Why go through all this trouble just to see if bacteria like citrate or not?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And you'd be surprised how many people ask that. But this test, it's not just a fun science experiment. It's got real-world implications. Think about it. Each type of bacteria, it's got its own preferences when it comes to food, its own what we call metabolic preferences. Some are like, those picky eaters. They only like a few specific things. And then you've got the more adventurous types, willing to try anything. This Simmons citrate test, it helps us figure out those preferences, helps us sort the picky from the adventurous. And you know what? Knowing what a particular bacteria likes to eat, that can tell us a ton about them, where we might find them hanging out, how they get along with other organisms, even how they might affect us, our health.
So it's like a dietary fingerprint for each type of bacteria, a way for scientists to tell them apart.
You got it. That's a perfect way to put it. And understanding these differences, well, that's key. It's a game changer in so many fields. In medicine, for example, it's how we can pinpoint what's causing an infection.
It's like we're doing detective work, but instead of dusting for fingerprints, we're looking at what bacteria like to snack on.
Exactly. And speaking of snacking, let's get back to those bacteria and their citrate cravings. Remember, we were talking about how some bacteria just love the stuff, while others, well, not so much.
Right, like some are all about that citrate buffet, and others are more like, no thanks, I'm good with my usual.
That's a great way to put it. Our sources actually give us a couple of specific examples. One type of bacteria that's a total citrate enthusiast, and another one that just won't touch the stuff. What do you say we dive into those?
Yeah, let's. I'm curious to see what we can learn from these picky eaters.
Yeah.
So who's up first? The citrate lover or the hater?
Let's start with the enthusiast. Our source mentions Enterobacter aerogens. This one, it turns that agar, a brilliant royal blue, remember, total citrate fan.
Right, so no picky eating for Enterobacter aerogens.
Nope, it's perfectly happy to use citrate as its main energy source. And this little tidbit, this tells us a lot about where we might find it in the wild, so to speak.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Give me the lowdown.
Think about places where citrate is pretty abundant, surfaces of fruits, veggies, things like that. Those are prime real estate for this kind of bacteria.
So knowing Enterobacter aerogens is a citrate fan, That gives us clues about its natural habitat. It's like, I don't know, if you've got a friend who only eats pizza, you probably wouldn't expect to find them hanging out at a sushi bar, right?
Perfect analogy. Okay, so now for the picky eater. Our source, it tells us about Escherichia coli.
Escherichia coli, that's a mouthful.
You got that right. Most people just call it E. coli. And this one, totally different story. E. coli, it won't go anywhere near citrate. Leaves that agar completely unchanged.
Really? So what does that tell us about our friend E. coli?
Well, we can kind of deduce, right? It's evolved to thrive in places where there are other food sources, more readily available ones, not citrate. Like, for example, the intestinal tract of animals.
Ah, so E. coli, it's found its own niche, its own all-you-can-eat buffet, just somewhere else. It's amazing how even in this, microscopic world, it's all about finding your place, that perfect spot where the food, or in this case the citrate, is up for grabs. But here's a thought. What about other stuff? Things maybe a little weirder than citrate. That bacteria uses fuel.
You're thinking outside the petri dish now. I like it.
You know, it makes you think about those stories you hear about bacteria in, crazy places, right? Those volcanic vents, the bottom of the ocean, places we can't even imagine.
You're absolutely right. The microbial world is full of these incredible survivors, each with its own strategy, its own way of making a living. And we might think about sodas and oranges when we think citrate, but honestly, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Bacteria, they've evolved to use some pretty surprising stuff as fuel.
Okay, so hit me with it. What's the weirdest thing they can survive on?
Well, take those volcanic vents you mentioned. Some bacteria down there, they thrive on sulfur. Sulfur compounds, they turn that stuff into energy. It's mind-blowing.
Sulfur, like the stuff that smells like rotten eggs.
Yep, that's the one.
Wow. It's like their version of photosynthesis, right?
Yeah.
Except instead of sunlight, they're using, sulfur.
You got it. And don't even get me started on the bacteria that live deep, deep in the ocean. They hang out around these hydrothermal vents. You know, those underwater geysers, the ones that shoot out that super hot water full of minerals.
Yeah, I've seen pictures.
Yeah.
Pretty wild.
Well, imagine living there. These bacteria, they haven't just adapted to handle it. They actually need those extreme conditions to survive.
It's kind of humbling when you think about it, right? We get all worked up about our own need for, food, a roof over our heads. But these microscopic guys are out there totally rocking a lifestyle we can barely comprehend. It really puts things in perspective.
It really does. And the Simmon citrate test, simple as it is, it's given us this amazing window into this hidden world, this whole universe that's right there, teeming all around us, even if we can't see it.
We started with this question, can bacteria live on soda? And here we are talking about volcanic vents, bacteria powered by sulfur. I love it.
That's what I love about science and about being curious. Every answer, it just leads to more questions, more things to explore. Who knows what other strange adaptations and survival strategies are out there, just waiting for us to find them.
You know, it really makes you think twice about that last sip of orange juice you didn't finish, or that bottle of soda sitting on the counter.
Exactly. There could be a whole microscopic party going on in there, and we'd be none the wiser.
This has been an incredible deep dive, hasn't it? From the back of our refrigerators to the bottom of the ocean. All thanks to this color-changing test and the fascinating world of bacteria. Who knew microbes could be so complex and so hungry?